Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's been a great night so far, and I know we're in for a real treat with James McBride tonight as well. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Miami Book Fair. This is our 34th book fair, and we could do nothing at all without the great support of Miami-Dade College. And they don't have a noose back there if I don't say that. I mean, I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. I've worked with Dr. Padron now for 35 years, and there's no one I admire more. And everybody on this campus opens up their hearts and minds and lets this thing happen. So we really appreciate everything they do as well. A couple of things, we have a few new things. We have something called a porch, if you want. It's in that direction. Each night and during the book fair, you can go and hear music and enjoy yourself there. And then all throughout the weekend, it'll be open too, with all kinds of things. Now, there have been some scheduling changes, like Khazar Khan is not at 9:30 in the morning. He's later in the afternoon. And things like that from the Fairgoer's Guide. So go to miamibookfair.com to get the most recent schedule updates as well. I want to take a little personal, prerogative and dedicate this particular event, because I know they both would have loved it, to two people. One person passed away a while ago, but I just learned of another passing that just happened today. And that's someone many of you in the community might know. He was a character, but he was an amazingly talented writer, thinker. He was kind of a Renaissance guy, and that's Ferdy Pacheco. And Ferdy Pacheco just passed away today, unfortunately. He had been ill, and he's someone that meant a lot to me and to all of us in the literary community here. And then I would also like to recognize someone who had left us about a year or so ago, and that's Sue Miller, who was a huge supporter of everything we did here at the Miami Book Fair. And I want to thank her family and everybody who continues their support. In fact, it's my pleasure to bring up her daughter, Leslie Miller Science, who is a philanthropist in her own right, and she's an educational activist, and she also is an impact investor. Leslie is founder of Achieve Miami, a foundation that launches, scales, and develops programs that narrow the achievement gap. Their signature programs include Summer Service Academy, Saturday Service Academy, a Teacher Leadership Fellowship, and a mentoring program for outstanding educators. Leslie chairs the board of Teach for America here in Miami, a national organization building a massive network of outstanding leaders who have committed at least 2 years to teaching in low-income neighborhoods. Before launching her foundation, Leslie spent decades as a successful entrepreneur in retail and real estate. Leslie's proudest accomplishment, though, is seeing her 5 grown children dedicate their time and resources to strengthening their own communities. And as my own sons were friendly with her youngest son, I can attest to that fact, that her kids are kind of remarkable, which says a lot about Leslie. So please welcome Leslie Miller Science to the stage.
Well, good evening. Hi. So, James McBride. James McBride isn't just the #1 best-selling American classic author, and he isn't just the acclaimed musician and songwriter who toured with Jimmy Scott, wrote songs with Anita Baker and Grover Washington, and even helped Barney the Dinosaur. He's not just a recipient of the National Humanities Award of 2016. His list of awards and acclaims is long and impressive, but all those pieces don't paint the full picture. James McBride is hilarious. He's a little quirky, but he's insightful, he's imaginative, and he's authentic. His tribute to his mother, In the Color of Water, has sold over 2.5 million copies and has traveled the world over in 6 languages. His other bestsellers, Song Gets Sung, Miracle at Santa Ana, and Kill 'Em and Leave, are more examples of his unrivaled storytelling, his skill and eye for character and detail. 5 Carat Soul, that you will hear about, his latest collection of short stories, reflects more of his depth and his ability to spring from a place where identity, humanity, and history converge. It's a real honor to introduce you all to an incredible artist of the highest form, James McBride.
Thank you for clapping. I thought that was a very fine introduction by Miss Leslie Miller Saints, and she doesn't do that much. So I want you to know that it took a lot of heart for her to come up here and talk to you like that. So I see there's one or two. I think there's a Jew in the audience. I can just tell. It's just one or two. When I was little, my mother used to tell me if you chew gum and swallow it, your behind will close up. So I will not swallow my gum at this particular time. Well, it's nice, so many of you to come out here tonight. It's so nice to see so many nice people here. Really, really good to see you, and it's really good to know that you're here, and there's so much love in the room. I just can't stand it. It's just too... Well, I won't talk too long. I'm just going to read for the next 6 hours, and then when I'm done, it's a Q&A, multiple choice. I'm going to introduce my new book to you, and then after that, I'll open the floor to questions that you might have, because I think you have lots of questions. And this is the place to ask them. And it's so nice for you to come out here to talk, to see me talk, when you could just be home watching the basketball game, whatever it is you do in your spare time. I don't have a TV, so I'm a little bit, I don't know what's going on. All right, so the name of my new book is called 5 Carat Soul, and it's a book of short stories. And these stories I've been writing for years. And so what happened was, I just mentioned it to an editor, and an editor said, well, let me see them. So I sent a few of them, and he said, these are pretty good. You got any more? And I had a couple more, and then he said, well, a little to the right, a little to the left. So I had a couple more that I've been hiding. Writers have stuff that they're hiding that they don't want to show anybody, and a couple of these were like that. So the first ones I wrote when I was, not the first in the collection, but some of these I wrote when I was 25 or 26 years old. And it didn't mean that they were any good, because you'll have to decide that. But I'll tell you what they're about. And then if you like what I say, then you'll spend the money to buy the book. And if you don't, you just give them as Christmas presents to people that you don't like. I'll summarize each one for you, because they're not that many. The first one is called the Underground Railroad Boxcar Set, and this is one of the newer ones, more recent stories. And it's about a Jewish toy collector who lives in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and his job is, he's a guy who sells antique toys. Like, for those of you who don't know, like old toys are really valuable. And so this guy stumbles across the most valuable toy ever, worth millions and millions of dollars. It's called the Underground Railroad Boxcar Set. And someone sends him a picture, and he sees this picture, and he can't believe it. It's this little black kid holding this train, Underground Railroad Boxcar Set, an engine and 4 cars that's worth more than, it's like a Leonardo da Vinci painting. And so he finds out who the owner is, and the owner is this preacher who lives in Springfield Gardens, Queens. And he goes to see the preacher, and the preacher's wife says, he's not here, but she said to just give it to you. And so he says, I can't take it. It's right. In his briefcase, he had like $99,000. He was ready to start bidding millions, and he had backers who were going to get. And the lady said, no, you can. No, he says, you can have it. But I don't want. I can't take. You just take it. And so he finally meets the preacher, and she says, I want to pay. No, don't. It's yours. I don't care. I don't want something my great grandma passed on. I don't want to have anything to do it. Here, you can have it. So the story is a reveal. as to why this preacher, Spurgeon Hart, wants to give this toy collector, who is 68 years old. This is, he'd like to retire. He was a former actor who worked in the Catskills for retired Jewish cab drivers as his audience. And now this is his chance to make this money, and he just can't stand it. And so he finally convinces the guy to let him sell it. He sells it, he makes millions. And then there's a reveal after, which reveals why this guy didn't want to sell him the train set and wanted to give it to him. So you have to read the story to find out what happens. The 5-Carat Soul Bottom Bone Band is about a group of kids in a steel town in Pennsylvania, western Pennsylvania, who are in a band called the 5-Carat Soul Bottom Bone Band. And it's told from the perspective of a 12-year-old kid named Butter, who plays organ in his church. And basically it's a novella, so there are 4 stories that are attached. So each story is connected to the last. The first story is about a kid named Buck Boy Robinson, who tries to rob a Korean grocery store and gets shot. And then this is the aftermath of that shooting, where there's marches, and then the preacher comes, and we're going to do it. And then the poor Korean merchant is standing there. And so this is the whole business of what that looks like from the inside. And then the other stories are Ray Ray's Picture Box is about a kid who is disabled, so-called mentally retarded or autistic. Blub is about a kid who it's really about a cat. Goat is about the fastest kid in the neighborhood. He's so fast, he beats this neighborhood is called The Bottom. And this is where all the poor black kids live, and all the poor in this little steel town. And the goat is like the fastest kid in the bottom, and he beats everyone in the bottom, and then he gets famous, and people from Uniontown and Pittsburgh come to film, and he gets a scholarship. But it's really about literacy. And I really wrote that story for Mrs. Barbara Bush, who, the Bushes have done more for Laura Bush. And when someone told me that the Bush twins were here yesterday, huh? Oh, yeah? They were my warm-up? I should be warming up for them. Well, Barbara Bush and Laura Bush have done more for literacy and in the publishing industry in the country than any first ladies that I can think of, really. Laura Bush created the Texas Book Festival. She made the National Book Festival in Washington an extraordinary event, and never really got credit for it, And now, and those of you who were complaining about the Bushes, oh, don't you wish they were there now, don't you? Yeah, well. But in any case, I wrote Goat knowing that Mrs. Bush would read this book. But I haven't heard from her yet. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Because Barbara Bush says what's on her mind, And if she don't like you, if she doesn't like it, she'll say it, But it doesn't mean that she's a bad person. It means she's an honest person. I'll take that kind of honesty any day, as opposed to someone saying, I like you, I really like you. That's, In any case, it's really about literacy. And it was inspired in part by a conversation that I heard Mrs. Bush have in one of her literacy events when she travels around to raise money for literacy. There were a bunch of writers in the back, and this Mexican woman had won, she had become someone who was literate. And there was a backstage moment where she and Mrs. Bush were talking, and no one was there, it was just them two. And I just happened to be standing kind of behind the curtain, and I could hear them talking. And if you heard them talking, you'd have thought these two women were about to go shopping. They were just like, oh, really? Well, why didn't you just, it wasn't like what you think it would sound like. It was really interesting. And I admire anyone who respects the humanity of someone else to not talk down to them. That really says a lot about who you are. Okay, so the next one is, the next story is about Father, it's called Father Abe. It's about a little mixed race boy who thinks Abraham Lincoln is his father. The Moaning Bench is about 5 people who are standing at the gates of what is quote unquote hell, with a character called the gatekeeper who says, you were supposed to go behind this door here where it's very hot and so forth. But at the last moment, someone was not sure that someone was my boss or thinks he is. And so now you have a chance to state your case. And so each of them state their case. And as they go down the list, there's 5 of them. When he gets to the 4th one, it's a little girl, and he starts giving the little girl, because he's woofing on each one of them. He says, you were sleeping with your neighbor, and, you look at you, blah, blah, blah. And then when he gets to the little girl, he starts woofing on her. And the 5th man, the 5th person on the bench stands up, and there's this boxer, this resplendent boxer, giant black guy with muscles, obviously he'd gotten knocked out in the middle of a fight, and he stands up and says, I don't belong here. And then they have this discourse in which the boxer ends up fighting the devil for the lives of him and the 4 others. The Christmas dance is based on a true story. It's about a town in in Italy called Somacolonia. And this is what happened when the 92nd Buffalo Division soldiers were surprised by the Germans who mounted a surprise Christmas Day attack on Italy. The same day they attacked the Battle of the Bulge, which is a very famous business of war, they mounted a surprise attack on the United States troops that were in Italy during World War II, and this is based on a true story in Somacolonia. And the person this story is based on, really the narratives of real people, one of whom is named Florentino Lopez, whose daughter lives here in Miami somewhere. He's a Puerto Rican who was born and raised in San Juan and later came to New York. The other character is based on Judge Skiz Watson, who they named the federal court after him in New York. And finally, the last person was Lieutenant John Fox, who received, after 56 years, received the Medal of Honor from Bill Clinton for his service in Italy during World War II. The Fishman Angel is about an angel about a slave who meets an angel who tells the slave some magic words that make their way to Abraham Lincoln. And Mr. P and the Wind is about a lion in a zoo in Washington, D.C. And for those of you who read The Good Lord Bird, the voice... Are you married, miss? Are you married? Oh, I see your husband. Okay, sorry. All right. The Good Lord Bird, the voice of the Good Lord Bird really began in this story, which was written a long time ago. This is one of the stories I wrote. Really, I was covering Michael Jackson for. We came to Miami, in fact, the Victory Tour. The Thriller. When Michael Jackson had like his second face, or whatever. We came here. I remember that. And I wrote this story around that time. So I'll read you from the beginning of this story, this is a novella too, and they're connected stories. And this is told from the perspective of the lion. And it's called Mr. P and the Wind. And the beginning of the story is, basically this was written before I wrote The Good Lord Bird, but this is when I started to learn the voice that you would later on see in The Good Lord Bird. Because The Good Lord Bird is written in this sort of sudden twang that, and people often ask, how did you come up with that? Well, it took a long time. And I grew up in a house where people talk like they were from the South, but to adopt that sort of tongue was a developmental process. And this, if you read that book, you'll read this and you'll say, oh, it started here. So this is the beginning of Mr. P and the Wind. And this is the lion talking. This is the story is told from the perspective of the lion. And this is the lion talking. And this is the beginning of Mr. P and the Wind. This chapter is called The 24th Hour. I am a lion. I live in a zoo, but I was once a free lion and never forgot it. Now, many years ago, before I was captured and brung here, I knowed a lion who ate a man. His name was Box. I don't know how Box come to that name, for lions got their own names for their own purpose. And that name was a puzzlement to me. Box is a human name, you see, and it stands to reason maybe a human gived him that name. However it happened, or whether Box got a reason for telling it or not telling it, it ain't my business to know. For most lions know that man things often ain't got no purpose, and no creature of the jungle is going to sniff around something that ain't purposeful, especially something big as a name. For lions got their own names that's particular to them, like Monkey Tricked Him, or His Wife Don't Visit, or Feet Smell Funny, or Don't Trust Her 'Cause She's a Son, or Orange Head, and all like that. For example, humans call me Hal, but my real name is Get Along, Go Along. No animal in his right mind would dare call me Hal unless they want me lunching on their guts. But Box come to his name some kind of way. That was his first mistake, I think, to call himself by a man name when he had his own mother-called name. I never knew Box's real name, by the way. Never stupid enough to ask, neither, for Box was what you call a plain old dry long so lion. He was a hard lion, set in his ways. He didn't take no crap off nobody. Now, because Box was hard set in his ways, he couldn't adjust to nothing. He didn't like fancy things, no springboks, rhinos, ostrich, monkey, and all that kind of crap for him. No, sir, just straight out blood and guts. Zebra, snake, snake, zebra, whatever you could get. He was what you call old country. He didn't slaughter a lot, but what he did slaughter, he did eat. Most of what he ate was bigger creatures, so the smaller, scarcer ones could grow big for better eating later. He didn't waste nothing, including time. So when he seen me walking around one day when I was but a little cub, he said, "Sit here a minute, I got something to tell you." I sat down to listen, for Box wasn't nobody to ignore. Now, I heard many a story told to me when I was a cub running free back yonder in Africa. And a bunch of them stories was lies, for animals ain't no different than man that way. The story starts out one day, and 5 days later it grows tree branches and leaves, and before you know it, it's the size of a mountain with caves and rocks, and you can't see the top or bottom of the thing while standing on it. But Box told me this story himself, and Box wasn't the type to lie. This is what Box told me, and then the story continues. So, you don't want me to read you the whole story, do you? Huh? All right, I'll read a little further. Now, kiddies, I want you to drink your milk and cookies with your coffee. And don't you write no cheating on your test. No, okay? All right, I'll continue. This is what Box told me. He was coming through the jungle one day, and a hunter surprised him, got the drop on him. Box walked right past him, never smelled him nor sensed him, nothing. The man jumped out of a bush from behind Box holding a spear with dead lion scent all over it. He had Box dead to rights. He had old Box cold. Wasn't nothing Box could do. Box knew his big head was going to hang from the wall of the man's lair for the rest of the time while the man apologized to Box and all his relatives for taking his life and so forth, for that's how the old-timers did it. They put you to big sleep and thank your relatives afterwards by praying and so forth so your souls can live together for the rest of the time while he uses your claws as plates for his smoking sticks and so forth. There wasn't nothing Box could do, so he said to himself, "It is a good day to die," and turned to the man and waited to sleep. But this man knew too much, because instead of throwing his spear when Box turned on him, the man spoke to Box in thought speak. Know what he said? He said this: "I know it ain't your 24th hour." Well, that threw old Box. I don't know what threw old Box more, man talking in thought speak, which is how animals speak, or man speaking about the 24th hour. Both had never happened to Box before, but man spouting off about the 24th hour put the thing in a different light. Should I continue? See, a lion won't eat but 1 hour a day. The other 23 hours we mostly sleep or look for fun or sex. That's our game. Lions is higher orders, which is what animals is call ourselves. It's mostly a pleasure trip being a higher order, except 1 or 2 rules you got to stick to. For this group of higher orders, lions, that is, the 24th hour is our line in the sand. See, we're harmless 23 whole hours a day. You can do whatever you want around the king of the jungle for them 23 hours. Throw a dance, write your auntie letters, take your clothes off and dance buck naked. Don't mean nothing to us. But that 24th hour, that lone hour we is eating, you want to be around us then. You might want to go play cards or visit your Aunt Thelma across the woods someplace or do whatever it is that smelly humans do during that time. Box, old-fashioned soul he was just floored by that whole business. He just plain didn't know what to do. First, me hearing man throw thought speak around like that, then him going on about the 24th hour. Box got chicken-hearted. So he said, "Excuse me?" "You heard me," the man said, in clear thought speak. "I know this ain't your 24th hour. You know how I know? I've been tracking you, Box. You still in your 23 hours of wandering around, sleeping, looking for water and fun and sex and all that. So I won't kill you, for I don't want your head now. I want your head in your 24th hour when you are hunting, for I am a great chief myself, and I'm looking for something mighty like me. So I'm going to let you live. I'm even going to suggest a few things for you to do in your free 23 hours, Box, for I have traveled many places, and I know many things, and I can help you. Then he patted Box on the shoulder and turned away. That's when Box jumped him. He knocked the man down, grabbed the man's spear with his mouth, and stuck the tooth end down into the earth so the stick stood up like a pole. Then he snatched him up in his mouth and whipped the man across the stick, back and forth, beating the man with his own stick, beating the stick with the man. And when he was done, he threw him down and tore him up, ripped him up, ran a paw across the man's face, and killed him dead. Then he ate him, or a good part of him, and slept a good 2 days without waking up. Many a day I've thought about Box while sitting in this here cage, pacing back and forth, night and day, year in and year out, thinking about it. The hunter did no harm to old Box. The man had him cold and didn't kill him. He even offered to school Box on how to live good in his free time. Still, old Box killed him. You know why? He was insulted, see? If man had walked off and said nothing, Box would have walked on to the jungle and gone about his business. But man had to turn around and tell a higher order, a grown lion, what was in his head. Box didn't want that man defining him and telling him who he was and what his plans was and what Box was supposed to do in his free 23 hours and how man knowed everything Box was supposed to do in his free time. That was Box's 23 hours to do with as he pleased. And just so long as man wasn't fooling around in that magic 24th hour, that 1 hour when nothing in the world is safe from a lion who's got to eat, then he was all right. But he threw himself in Box's business, them other 23 hours, telling Box what he could be doing with his time and how he was supposed to be sleeping and so forth. He was counting Box's 24th hour like it was his own. Well, Box didn't like that. He figured if the man was so big in his britches to count up his 24th hour, he might want to tell him what to do with his 23 hours, and then with his 22nd hour, and the 21st, and so forth. So Box cleaned him up, beat him with his own stick, and sent him to the big nap, because he knew it wouldn't be long before that man told him what to do with his one eating hour and every single other hour. I asked Box later, what did man sound like? For I had never spoken to man. You can't handle it, he said. Well, what do man taste like, I asked, for I had never tasted man neither. He said, tastes like chicken. So that's a sample of the 5 carats. So look, a book is supposed to bring you some comfort, and it's supposed to bring you some joy, and it's supposed to bring you some distraction, especially now in a time of great difficulty. So that was part of the reason why this book was published, and it's part of the reason why I write, because I don't really. Life is hard enough. It's so nice to be able to just stick your head in a book and forget your troubles for an hour or 2 or 3. So that's part of the point of it all. I think we're into a half hour at this point, so we can. You know what I'll do? I'll save some time and answer some questions that you have about The Color of Water, because I know that's why, like, all of you are here. So, common questions are. What did my mother think of the book? I answered that question before, but you still want to know the answer? Yeah. Of course you do, because that's the only book you care about. But no, yeah, look, Dominus, I apologize to you, Plumas, thank you for coming, brother. When I wrote The Color of Water, the publisher gave me 3 copies of the book. They give you galleys, I took one to my local bookstore. He didn't even read it. I'm not kidding. Well, first of all, The Color of Water was declined by many publishers. Shall I name them? I shall not. So I gave one to a local bookstore. He didn't even read it, And then I gave him. I was living in Brooklyn at the time, in Fort Greene, like the old Brooklyn, the one before the white people took it over. Like not just the white, not the. I said, let me track it. The millennials, because there's a different type of person now that has to. Do you know something? There's an apartment around the corner from where I work. They're renting this place for $6,000 a month, and they didn't even paint the place. I have a question. Where do these people get this kind of money? Who are these people? I just want to say, are you from the United States? Are you sure? Who are these people? In any case, before Fort Greene became, Fort Greene, when it was just downtown Brooklyn, that's when I lived there. And so my mother was living in near Trenton in Ewing Township. So I had to, I knew I had to show it to her. So I got my car, I drove across the Arizona Bridge, $10 toll, paying the New Jersey Turnpike, $1.50 toll. So as I got to her house, I said, hey, Mom, here's the book. I gave her the book. Got back, I drove New Jersey Turnpike, $1.50 toll in Arizona, knocking, robbing me. And I got back to Brooklyn, and then I called back. And I said, my mother and my sister were living together at the time. And I called, my sister Kathy picked up the phone. I said, Kathy, what's going on? She said, don't call back. Mommy's been in the bedroom crying for two days, all day. Don't call back. Boom, she hung up the phone. So I waited. I called back the next day. Kathy picked up the phone. I said, what's going on? She said, Mommy came out. She went to the bathroom. She had some coffee. She's back in the bedroom crying. Don't call back. Boom. The third day I called up and I said, Kathy, what's going on? And like biblically, she said, Mommy came out the bedroom. So I jumped in my car, drove across the Arizona, but $8, ripping me off New Jersey, $1.50 toll. So I got to Mommy's house and I said, Mommy, what do you think of the book? 14 years, paying you, what do you think? And she said, it's okay. So you could see the Deepak Chopra of her soul was just, well, my mother comes from the generation, like, if they don't make a movie from it, it's like no good. And there's never been a movie made from the book, and probably won't be while I'm living. I just can't. I'm not interested in that. But I think she liked the book. I mean, she was really, what she was afraid of was that her children would read about her and not respect her and love her. In fact, after reading about her history, the children respected her and loved her even more. And as a result of that book, I got to meet a lot of my Jewish cousins. I have an aunt who lived down here in Miami. My mother's sister lived in this area. And she was a very nice person. They met after 50 years. And while they weren't close, I actually was there when they met. They weren't. What my mother wanted from her sister was forgiveness for abandoning her. Her sister was happy to do that. But she had a hard time with my mother's conversion to Christianity. She couldn't accept that. So they fought about that for about a half hour until age took over and they just got tired. My mother's family, my mother and her sister did very well given what they came from. And one of the things that's really interesting as you get older, I'm really sorry to see elements of the Jewish culture going by the wayside now. People who don't speak Yiddish, who don't understand. Listen, if you haven't read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich just before the election that I have, like I did, you don't understand what's going on. And without insulting anyone, this is the only political statement I'll make. If you're Jewish and you voted for Donald Trump, you really should read that book. You should really read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer, because there's so many parallels in that book to where we are now. And I have a lot of friends. My best friend, David Preston, his mother and father were Holocaust survivors. And everything that David Preston said about this election came true, because he studied the Holocaust very closely. Everything he said about this current political situation came true. And you have to remember that we have to leave something behind for our children and grandchildren. When I studied the war in Italy, it was interesting. I wrote Miracle of St. Anna, which was a book about the Buffalo Soldiers. And it was a movie that Spike Lee did, which I hadn't seen the movie in about 7 years. And I saw it about a week ago. And it was very good. Even if you don't like Spike Lee, you should see the movie. And I never thought I'd have to say that about something that I wrote, but you should see the movie. It's in English, Italian, and German. And Spike did and it really, in future years, and he was there when they were showing, this was at BAM in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And afterwards he said, 50 years from now, people are going to see this movie for what it is. He really did a great job. And it's an excellent movie. It shows you what the Nazis are capable of. But because Spike Lee did it, and so many people don't like Spike Lee for a lot of variety of reasons that we don't need to get into here, the movie was simply ignored. People don't even know it exists. But you can find it. And if you want to see what happened in Italy during World War II, see Miracle of St. Anna. The reason why I mention that was when I was studying the war in Italy from the perspective of the Italians. I lived in Italy for 6 months. Everybody there they were related to partisan. Nobody was a fascist. Nobody's grandfather was a fascist. Everybody was a partisan. Come on. But the ones who were truly related to the partisans, like the sons of the partisans who fought with the Allies, they remembered. And I remember when William McCaffrey, who was the father of Barry McCaffrey, he was the commander of he was basically the commander of the 92nd Division, and he was respected and admired by the black soldiers who served under him. William McCaffrey told me a story. He said, after the war ended, just after it ended, there were 15,000 black soldiers in Italy. They marched to Genoa, and they returned the ashes of Christopher Columbus to the Italians. And then he spread his soldiers all around the city of Genoa and said, keep order. And everything seemed calm, so he called them all in. After one day, he had to send them all back out again, 15,000, quote-unquote, Negro soldiers to maintain order in the city because there were so many murders that happened, because people remembered what happened during the war. People are going to remember where you were at this time. And you're going to have to answer to your children and your grandchildren about where you were now. But they make movies now about people during the Holocaust who stood up by themselves. But most of Europe did not. The French shipped 75,000 Jews to their death without even being asked. And you go to France, everyone was a partisan, everyone was a partisan. No, they weren't. No, they were not. And every one of us who is here now, we'll have to answer to history about where we were when our country began this great turn toward this, quote unquote, toward where we are now. I won't say any more about that. All right, so about my mother and the family and, Of course, if my mother was alive, she'd say, what are you doing, you stupid? She'd be like, religion and politics. Like, my mother would just pull out her belt and start spanking me right now on stage. Like, don't you ever... But I've met many of my Jewish relatives. When my mother's sister died, several of us went to her service in Manhattan. I have some Jewish cousins that I've gotten to know well and others that I haven't gotten to know well. And it hasn't been all hunky-dory. Some of them don't want to get to know my family. And frankly, some of my siblings have no interest in meeting their Jewish cousins. I don't labor on anybody else's hate and hang-ups. That's their problem. I only know what I need to do. I know what I have to do. I know what I teach my children to do. What someone else does, you can't preach it. You just have to live it. You have to live it, and you have to suffer for what you believe in. Because if it ain't worth suffering for, it ain't worth doing in the first place. But I'm very proud of my mother and what she did and what she tried to do. She died in January 9th, 2010. She was 88. Her heart just gave out, And you know what? When she was dying, my sister and I were there, A lot of us, my sister and I went in the room, and she just at one point, she said, am I dying? And, we had the difficult task of telling her, yes, you are, And I said, but, don't worry, Mom, Jesus is waiting for you and God's there. And, that kind of revved her up. And then it occurred to her that my brother Hunter hadn't come back yet because he had gotten married and he was in Puerto Rico. So she sat up and waited for 5 hours until he came. Then she died. But, she died peacefully at home. And, I made sure she was dead. I pinched her finger as hard as I could and made sure because she was so crazy. She was, it was tough, it was tough. But how lucky can one, as Frank Sinatra would say, how lucky can one man be? How lucky can one guy be? I was raised by a wonderful mother who gave me so much. And I do my best to give it back to other people. So those are the answers to, and what did my siblings think about the book? Well, look, in a family of 12, there's no democracy. If I had stopped to ask my siblings and say, I'm going to write a book about Mommy, that would have been like, I would have never gotten it done. I just did it from my perspective, and, I had one brother that said, why don't you just give my credit card number out, too? It's 25739. I said, look, with the $300 credit limit at Macy's, it's not like someone's going to buy a Jaguar with your, So he got over it, They got over it. Most of them really liked it. My brother Billy was a big supporter. He died in 2005. He was a doctor. He was a big supporter of the book. He was so proud. And most of my siblings were very proud of the book. A couple of them are, they're cantankerous. I have a brother who's a big Trump supporter, you could believe that. He was a doofus when he was a kid, so what can you expect? But that's, I shouldn't say that. Can I reel that back in? I want to reel that back in. No, that's not the proper thing to say. If you can't say it to the person when they're in the room, you shouldn't say it. I never agreed with most of what he did or said. And I know that he's a complicated person. And that's part of our problem. We can't deal with the complicated. It's easy to say, I'm going to make it, you know, we spanked them and we did all this crap in the 50s. Like the 50s was so great. I mean, I can see one or two of you were teenagers in the 50s. Not all of you, but one of you were teenagers in the 50s. And you know, the 50s wasn't so great. You know, we try to act like it was great. No, it wasn't. Now America's great right now. It wasn't no great again. Life was simple and all that. That's a bunch of smoke and puff. Propaganda of the highest order. America was so great back in the day. Don't waste your time thinking about that. Look to tomorrow. Be like Satchel Paige. The only thing that history is good for is to keep statistics. Look ahead. I never look back. I never read a book once it's done. That's why I didn't see Miracle at St. Anna after it came out. I saw it twice, and then I made a mistake of reading a review, which I never read, and I was done. It was it. But then I went and looked at it. I saw it a week ago at BAM, and I was so proud. I was so proud of what Spike did. And I was so proud of the actors and especially the Italian actors. They were so good. So anyway, now questions that you might have. Any other questions? Yes, sir?
You started talking about literacy. So what happened at the end? What's going on now with James Brown's estate?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, James Brown, to catch you up on my last book, which 8 people read, James Brown, well, thank you. James Brown left his entire estate, between $100 and $150 million, to educate poor black and white children in South Carolina and Georgia. He was very specific about that. It was for poor children of any race. To date, and that was 10 years ago, 11 years ago, to date, not a single child has received a single dime of that money. Because in South Carolina is like its own country. And they make and those of you who are from South Carolina know what I'm talking about. They have a governor there, they have a state court system there that just basically runs things the way they run it. So what happened was he set up this trust. The trust was attacked from 3 different sides. Some of his children attacked it. Greedy lawyers attacked it. It became a political football. And now what's happening is that James Brown's estate, every time his song is played, every time anything that's James Brown related goes into this giant trust fund, which feeds out millions of dollars to attorneys in South Carolina. Millions. And the only person who's following it is a 63-year-old grandmother named Sue Summer, a white woman, who stumbled onto this story while covering the court for the Newbury Observer, which is a small newspaper. And these guys, they hate her. They hate her. And she has no support. And this is the reason why this is important to mention. With the death of local newspapers and the death of local news, the death of local regional coverage, means that state papers like the South Carolina state papers, which once had newspaper reporters in the State House and so forth, they don't have the resources to send anyone to cover this. So all of this state news goes uncovered. I'm sure it happens here in Florida as well. And the only thing that's going to change that is what you start subscribing to the Miami Herald and the state and the small newspapers in your area. That's the only thing that's going to change it. Otherwise, you're going to have to get your news from the Comedy Channel like everybody else. And that's why Sue Summer's having such a hard time. And that's why these guys can steal this money from poor children in South Carolina that need it, because there's no press coverage. The Times went down there and did a big takeout. Okay, that made the rats scurry for cover. But then they came back, and the Times doesn't have the resources to go ahead and send a reporter to South Carolina because they have so much other stuff to cover. So the short answer is that it's still out there. The money's still being spent by lawyers. I just managed to get some money out of NYU to get someone down there to cover it, but I haven't found a person yet to help Sue, to just show up in court with Sue Summer. So, yes. I ended up writing the book about it. Oh, somebody called me. One of his children called me and asked me to take it on. Well, we can talk about it. I'm not going to, you know. Well, look, if you want to get into the specifics of that case while I'm trying to sell this book, why don't we talk after this? Okay? Because we're going to talk about Dallas, Buddy, Deborah. We could talk. Really, I have no interest in James Brown anymore. I put everything I had into that book. I spent 2 years on that book. It was really the worst experience of my professional life because everybody was lying. They're all a bunch of liars. All of them, they're all lying to get the man's money. The only person who told the straight truth is the 63-year-old white woman who doesn't even get paid for it. And that's Sue Summer. And so that's the only one I care about. That's the only one I really care about talking about because everybody else is trying to get this guy's money. The guy was in show business for 50 years. He danced the song. All you sing about James Brown, like this movie they did about James Brown, it's like 40% fiction. The acting was great, but it was just fiction. It was like, he beat his wife, he took drugs and all this stuff. This guy was like completely dedicated to education, despite his problems. I don't know of any other celebrity, myself personally. I can't think of one celebrity that left everything he had, every penny, other than a $2 million education trust fund that he set up for his grandchildren, and I don't even know if they used it. Everything else, his likeness, his dancing, his clothing, everything, his music, his publishing, everything, so that little kids can have an education. And the state of South Carolina should be ashamed of itself. Really, they should just defect. I think we should admit South Carolina, make them Puerto Rico, and bring Puerto Rico over here, and let Puerto Rico be a state. Really, but we can talk about the specifics of it later, but that's my overall view of the James Brown case in the state of South Carolina. And then, I've been told, don't ever come back here. Don't ever come back to this state. If you got to drive through South Carolina, go around Tennessee, come around, take the I-9, because they're vicious. There's a lot of money involved, and they're getting paid. And these are lawyers. They all of them are lawyers, and they all know each other, and they all went to the University of South Carolina. They play tennis together, and they play badminton, they vacation together, and it's shameful. Now, don't worry, when their life is over, they'll let them into hell. They'll get in there. They'll parachute them over if the bridge is out. That's what that's really what's going to happen. Any other questions about writing the book? Over here, and then yes.
Can you come up to the mic, please?
Oh, that's all right. If I'll repeat it. It's faster that way. Okay, talking about Onion, the character in the character Onion in The Good Lord Bird is a 12-year. Oh, yeah? Well, the reason why Onion is a boy pretending to be a girl is because I wanted to write from the perspective of a girl, but I didn't feel qualified to really speak as a 12-year-old slave girl from Kansas. So, and I had been fooling with the John Brown story for a long time. Actually, I really wanted to write about Abraham Lincoln, but then I read Charles, I can't remember the writer's name, Carl Sandburg. Carl Sandburg wrote a 2-volume work about Abraham Lincoln, and I just said, it's been done. Great. So I didn't know how to go about, addressing that story. So I had to find a character that would portray John Brown in an interesting way that was not that was funny. Because, otherwise, how do you tell a story like that without making people say, like, you don't want it to be like one of these take your medicine books. Like, I can't stand books like that. You read it, you say, I know what this is about. I don't want to read it. Even though you should read it, the book basically says, take your medicine, Yes, you must. And you go, I ain't reading this, man. Is Spider-Man here? Where's Spider-Man? Okay, let me get the Spider-Man comic book, because you just said, I'm not going to read that, I wanted it to be funny, and I needed a character that was funny, that could tell it in a way that, portray some of these truths in a way that would make you smile, but still give you the truth. So that's how Onion was born. And in terms of his language, well, you saw how I developed that language from years ago. And then I just had to constantly rewrite his voice until it became natural. And then when it became natural, the book really started to roll. That book wrote itself, but it took a long time to get rolling. But once it got rolling, it was fine. And also, that book came at a time when I was in the middle of a very, very painful divorce. So it became like a great thing. I could just fall into this world and just follow Onion around, and it was wonderful. Between that and that magazine you get it when you like National Enquirer or whatever. Yeah, I'd buy that and then write a little bit of Onion and read that, and I didn't feel so bad about being broke. It was all right, I mean, this guy lost $30 million. What do you think of that? Yeah, she sued him. Yeah. So that's how I got through my divorce. Thanks to Onion. Any other questions? Yes. Well, what's happening with my music is that I usually do, normally every year I do maybe between 12 and 15 dates with a band. But this year I didn't do it partly because I'm a single father and I can't travel, now. So it's going to be another, and I might go to Poland next year with my band. And if I do, then I'll probably take it out and do a tour. And I might come back. I talked to Mitch about coming back here to Miami. But it's hard to tour now. I don't like to rehearse. I don't like anything about. I just like the playing. I don't like the sound check, the musicians. I don't feel like traveling musicians used to be fun. They tell whoppers and you're sitting there listening to their lives. Oh wow, they're smoking a reefer. And I don't smoke the reefers, as my mother would say. Those are the reefers. It's like those are the Smiths, those are the Joneses, those are the reefers. But I don't care what someone does in their spare time. But when you become the boss, it's just this guy's late. This guy, he needs an advance because he got to pay his mortgage. And then you're writing it on a matchbook, and then you forget. And then and he's got a gig at D.C. So you got to meet him in Dallas, and the driver's got a headache, and So a lot of that, it just becomes. I run a music program in my mother's church. My parents started a church in Brooklyn. The church still exists, a little tiny Baptist church. And I've been running a music program in there 5 years. I teach kids from age 8 to 12. I teach them, and me and 2 others, we teach them piano. And the ones who can't really play, we teach them drums. The ones who have, yeah, because they can't. I hope none of their parents are here. But the ones who don't have any real musical skill, or who don't have the discipline to learn, that each note, because piano requires discipline. You have to learn. Piano requires discipline and practice. But the ones whose parents make them practice, we teach them piano, whether they have musical skill or not. And we've had some success. We have 17 kids. We don't ask for money. We don't ask for grants. The whole premise of the program is this is a poor church. And you know what? The church is owned by the church. And the minute we're teaching these kids, in my opinion, we're not teaching them music. We're teaching them self-sufficiency. Many times people say, we want to give you money. We don't want your money. Money's not our problem. Money's not these kids' problem. If they got money to get a cell phone, they don't need money. If their parents got enough to get a telephone, a TV that big in their living room, what's the problem with money? The issue is not money. I've been around the world. I know that money's not the issue. Yes, money in New York for poor people is hard to come by. But if you're getting free lessons, and it says you have to be there at 2 o'clock, if you ain't there at 2 o'clock, then somebody else is coming. And I don't want to hear any excuses about this, that, and the other. Because when they go to do their tests and they do the thing in school, either they're prepared or they're not. And so you'd be surprised, parents who are like my mother was. I see my mother every week when I see these mothers walk in. Every week. I have one student who has no parents at all. I played her father died at 8. When we first met, her father was the only father there. He died of AIDS, and she still comes. She's being raised by her cousin, who, by the way, was in a car where there was some drugs and went to jail for 2 years because she didn't have a lawyer. And this woman has done a great job with this young lady. So that's why I don't care about this James Brown bullshit. I don't care about it. I don't even like talking about it because these people are bums, man. They wanted to get this guy's money. Meanwhile, every week, I see 17 kids and their parents and their caretakers who show up. They want to do the work. Now, if you ask me to talk about that, I'll talk about that all day because those are heroes to me. And some of these people work 2 and 3 jobs. This whole thing about welfare in New York, this whole stuff that Donald Trump is bullshit. Look, when I opened my church at 5 o'clock, the subway, the F. Smith and 9th Street F subway stop is right there. At 5 o'clock, there's a line of people coming from that subway going home because they're working at IKEA, they're working at 7-Eleven, they're working 2 or 3 jobs, and they come home from work. And if they're lucky, they can get a welfare check because they need the money. That's really what the issue. And not only that, some of my students, they tell me about their older brothers and sisters. This was like 2 years ago. They would budget in time so they could get frisked by the cops on the way to school. They would have to budget that and, give yourself an extra 15 minutes. And I see the cops at stop. I see it. I don't say anything about it. It's nothing to be said. All I say is, this is the wall. And there's a charter school down the street. And this is you. And they don't want you there. And you don't need to be there. All your culture is right here. You don't need to go see Disney. You want Disney? Look inside this church. It's free. My mother used to say, why am I going to go to a Broadway show? I can go to church and it's free. Because the music, the theatrical element, the history, it's all there. So my feeling is you use the culture that's there. That's the power of the culture. That's what the Yeshiva Institute is all about in New York. And good for them. They take the elements of Jewish culture and they spin it out and they say, look, if you don't like it, when you graduate, you can go home, smoke cigarettes and drink beer all your life. But this is where you come from. If you don't like it, that's okay, but we're going to give it to you now. And it makes these people strong. They don't have to use it, but it's in there. And the same thing with what I do in my program. I don't say, I'm not training musicians. I'm just training you to be self-sufficient. The discipline that you need, that music demands, will give you the culture that has lasted longer than anything around here and has gone around the world. So you're not poor. Anybody can buy a television set. But can you play an F sharp? Can you play a chord both hands? Do you know who Bach is? Do you know who Maria Callas is? Do you know who John Coltrane? Because if you know that, then math, science, anthropology ain't far from you. So I'm not interested in James Brown. I did the book. I did the best job I could for that man. He was a good person. He was a flawed person. He was a good person. He was misunderstood like many black people are in this society. Well, that's just how it is. But he did a good job. And the people who were robbing his money, don't worry, God's got plans for them too. Any other questions? One more? Yes? I wake up at 4:30. How do I budget my time? I wake up at 4:30 in the morning. I write for an hour until it's time to take my son to school. And I take him to school, and I come home, write a little more, take a little nap-a-poo, little nap-a-poo. And then I get up. I hit it, again until about noon, and that's it. But, Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays I can't because I got to teach and I got to prepare for the kids and all that stuff. So that's my usual. And I also usually spend 1 day a week at the library. Like afternoon, I go to the library and I just read and research. And oftentimes it's random. Like I know I'm looking for a book, but if I'm looking for a book here, I'll just kneel and see what's down there. Because, you have to keep, and I stay around people. Like I don't, I take public transportation. I don't go to a lot of committee meetings. I don't waste time with that stuff. All my work comes from hearing people talk. So, yes, you had a question? And then behind you? Huh?
What's next for you?
I'm working on a couple novels. Both of them ain't really cooking too good yet. Yes?
Oh, I just wanted to make the statement that about 20 years ago, we came to the book fair for the first time. And the first time and the first person who spoke and discussed their book was you.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, The Color of Water.
Wow, it's 20 years.
And then again, we saw you when you did,
It doesn't matter.
you were in the classroom that you spoke, and that was when you found out that you got the National Book Award.
Oh, okay.
And I just want to tell you that because of you, my husband and I come from New Jersey every year so that we should be at the book fair. And it was only a result of that that we heard you say.
Wow. Well, she said that, basically, for those of you who couldn't hear, she said, everybody needs to take out $10 and pass it up. Just because things are rough up here, and, he's got a program with the kids and the children. No, she just said, well, thank you very much.
I just want to tell you, because I'm so impressed with you and all that you've given to this world.
Well, thank you very much. She said so many nice things. I think maybe that would be the thing to end. Well, I'll end on this. There are a lot of very good writers who are going to come here this week. And if you have to spend money on a book and you only have money to buy one book, you might want to buy like their book, because there are, what Mitch does, let me just say this, independent bookstores are the last line of reason and discourse in this country, and that's no jive. The reason why I'm here is because independent booksellers like Mitch down here in Miami, they know books. And when you come and you say, what's a good book? They say, this is a good book. It doesn't happen with Barnes. I mean, thank you, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, but, it doesn't happen at the big bookstore, because the big bookstore, these people, a lot of the people, they're just working there and then they go away to do something else. They're not, they like books, but they're not like independent booksellers. So this week, there are going to be lots of writers down here who really need your support. And we need them to be successful. Because if their books don't fly at Barnes & Nobles, that's it. They don't get another book contract, and then we don't hear about them for 20 or 30 years or ever again. So if you have to decide between a book to buy and between my book and another book, don't tell the publisher I said it. You don't have to save your money and get somebody who hasn't had a shot. Because we need, I'm not saying it for my sake. I'm saying it because I love this country. Because we have to support the young writers and the not-so-famous writers in this country, because these are the people who, listen, we got the shouters in the newspapers saying, rah, 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 that's all good. But really what will push us ahead is reason and discourse. Historians, nonfiction writers, political writers, novelists who write things that are important. These are the people who are going to push, who are going to hold us together. And these are the ones that you and I need to support with the little bit of money we have. It's really hard to live. I understand that. I'll close with this little vignette. When I was writing The Color of Water, I was in Jimmy Scott's band. Jimmy Scott was a guy who used to sing like a girl. And we were flying to Montreal. And on the plane was a little Hasidic Jewish boy who sat right across the aisle from me. And it was me, the band was sitting here, and Jimmy was in first class, So there was a delay, and they decided to feed everybody. Well, I didn't tell anybody in the band I was working on this book about my mother, about Jews in the South, anti-Semitism. I didn't say anything. But when they tried to give the kid some food, he wouldn't eat. So I said to the flight attendant, I said, don't give him any. He's not going to eat. Just give him a glass of water. So the kid took the water, and then when he was drinking the water, I was looking at him, he went like this. He went. Like he was really smart. Like his mother said, don't talk to she must have said, don't talk. And that's how my mother would say. So one of the guys made a crack about the kid. One of the guys in the band made a crack about the kid. And we got into a horrible fight right on the plane. And we fought all the way. We got to customs. I don't know if we were making a ruckus or whatever, but they pulled us all out of line, all four of us. The drummer, the saxophonist, the bassist, and the pianist. And so we were so late to the gig. We were opening for Rosemary Clooney. We were so late to the gig. Like Jimmy's band, you had to wear a tuxedo and all this. Well, we were doing the sound check in our street clothes, and people were coming in. And so the straw boss of Jimmy's band was a bass player named Hill Green. And Hill saw the whole thing happen. He was sitting right next to me. And he's the guy who hires you for the job, He saw the whole thing unfold. And from his perspective, it just looked like I just jumped in the guy's face for nothing. It was a little joke or whatever. But Hill didn't say a word. He didn't say a word. He didn't crack a smile. He didn't say a word. But as we were warming up, Hill was behind me with his bass. And he leaned over and he said, you know what, James? He said, that joke wasn't funny to me neither. And then he kept warming up. And I say that to tell you this, that Hill Green is not a rich man. He lives in the Bronx, a little studio apartment. He plays his jazz, and he's been doing that for a long time. He's not a wealthy man with money, but he's rich in soul. He's rich in moral spirit. And he's a good person. And it's things like that that inch the collective good forward just a little bit. And if each of us could do just a little bit of that, just a little bit, we will push this country back to the direction that it belongs in. We're not asking for a lot, just a little. So keep that in mind. And thank you very much.
James McBride. I just have to say one thing. As an independent bookseller, this is the book to buy. This is my recommendation. We have plenty of books out there. James will be signing them over here in just a minute. If you can just line up toward that side, that would be great. Thank you so much.